everybody. Shall we get started? Since it's 1:15, can I just say welcome to everybody. It's good to see so many colleagues here for another of our SHAR inaugural lectures. And tonight we've got Professor Stephen Senn. He's in the statistical community. He's a very well-known figure, very widely read. He's currently working over in Luxembourg at a centre over there in stats, and he has previously been working as a professor of stats up in Scotland, but he's joined us as an honorary professor here in SHAR, which we're delighted that he's done so. But we are going to make him sing for his supper tonight, and to tell us something about some of the work that he's been up to. Now, our plan is just to follow our usual practice. Stephen will give a lecture, 45 minutes, something of that sort, and then we won't have questions, as is our tradition here at our inaugural lectures. Instead, we will have a reception outside. There will be drinks and nibbles, and Stephen will be there. And if you've got things that you would like to discuss with him about what he said, then you need to grab him there, and he can have a drink in order to deal with your comments and questions. So, having said that, I think I'll just hand over to you, Steve.
Okay, so thanks very much for the introduction, John, and thanks for being so numerous. I always say that I hope that there's something for everybody to hate in one of my talks, but I feel that maybe I may have overdone things here. So I'll just tell you a brief story, which is about some years ago, where in a small town somewhere, a grocer was surprised to find a figure come in and ask him, "Have you got any rotten fruit and eggs? Because I will pay very well for them." And the chap said, "Oh, yes, I know what you're going to do. You're going to go and see that ham actor play Shakespeare, aren't you?" And the reply was, "No, I am the ham actor." So first of all, I'd just like to make some acknowledgements. Of course, I'm grateful to you for giving me the opportunity to talk about a subject which is dear to my heart, and to have given me the title of Honorary Professor, and to point out that this work is partly supported by the European Union's 7th Framework Programme, the FP7 Programme, for research under the IDEAL project. It's, as I say, if you want to find out more about the IDEAL project, then in that case, I think a web search will show you some quite interesting work that we've been doing. So, outline. I'm going to talk about how clinical trial response is often misinterpreted. It's defined inappropriately in my view, why this matters and what we should do about it. So here's a question for you. Can we get rid of this somehow? Is that?
I think you could try.
No, we've tried that before.
We tried that before. Okay, never mind.
We can move it around.
Part of the noise in the that's okay. That's fine. Here's a question for you. Miss Smith had her headache reduced from 8 hours duration to 6. So it was reduced by 2 hours, or 25%. On the other hand, Mr. Jones had his headache duration reduced from 2 hours 5 minutes to 1 hour 55. So that's by 10 minutes, or 8%. So which of those two do you think had greater benefit? Well, the International Headache Society will tell you that Mr. Jones had a response, whereas Miss Smith didn't. And this is one of the consequences of dichotomies, is very stupid things happen once you start arbitrarily dividing people in this particular way. So here's a featured review, and a tweet, in fact, that drew my attention to it. Only 10% of people with tension-type headaches get a benefit from paracetamol. And how did they come to this particular figure? Well, in doing a meta-analysis, they found that 50% had no headache after 2 hours when treated with paracetamol, using that particular definition to dichotomize people. Whereas, on the other hand, 49% had no headache after 2 hours when treated with placebo. And the difference between 59% and 49% is 10%, and so, therefore, 10% benefited. And the number needed to treat for one extra patient to have a benefit is 10. If we also have a look at a recent article in Significance, which is headed "The drugs don't work or don't they?" then in that case, or do they? Then in that case, you can find this particular paragraph. When testing new drugs, researchers are asked to specify their statistical analysis plan before seeing their results. This can be a gamble if little is known about how a drug might work, but there is a way for researchers to keep their analysis options, says Corinne Bayer. So that's the strapline, if you like, for this particular study. And most of it, I must be fair to the author here, is about flexible approaches to drug development, and I can recommend reading the article for that alone. But here's an apparently innocent statement within it, looking at a particular treatment for pain control, a particular trial for pain control. Then, in that case, she found that claimed that it tells us we can help about 35% of migraine patients. And when you have a look again at that particular article, what you will find is that the definition for response was having complete pain cessation within 2 hours. So this particular arbitrary classification was the reason. So, the Cochrane Collaboration meta-analysis, they've had 23 studies, 6,000 patients in total, and the outcome measurement was being pain-free by 2 hours. But if we look at the significance article, then it was actually about explaining a very nice dose-finding approach by Novartis, the MCP mod dose-finding approach, but used on a trial run by Merck. So she had, in fact, succeeded in getting hold of the data that the Merck trial was run on. There were 7 doses being compared to placebo, 517 patients in total, and again the outcome measure was pain-free by 2 hours. So here we have people who are experts in their field apparently accepting without any worry whatsoever what is, when one stops to think about it, a very peculiar definition of success. In both cases, however, the patients were only studied once, and a dichotomy of a continuous measure was made. There was no attempt to measure anybody more than once as regards having had a headache. Nobody had a repeat headache treated. A causal conclusion was drawn that went beyond simply comparing proportions. So in the one case, the significance article, the author talked about the proportion of patients who would respond. Cochrane talked about the proportion of patients to whom it would make a difference in terms of response. So they noted that under paracetamol, 59% had a response. Under placebo, 49% had a response. The difference is 10%. And so they said, therefore, what happened is the drug would only work for 1 person in 10. But the conclusion about patients could equally be made about headaches, because since each patient was studied only once, then effectively anything which is said about patients is simply a statement about headaches. And so the question arises, how can we separate one from the other? How do we know that what we're talking about here is we're talking about a difference in patients? After all, headaches are things which occur randomly. There's a certain random duration to a headache, and we don't really know what would have happened for a given patient. I'm going to try and explain this tomorrow in more detail. And what I claim is that the dichotomy causes causal confusion. And here's a statement for you which I usually apply to big data. We tend to believe the truth is in there, but sometimes it isn't, and the danger is we find it anyway. And basically the problem here is the data are incapable of telling you this sort of thing, but the temptation to conclude this sort of thing is absolutely enormous. So what I propose to do is the following. I'm going to actually create a simple model, and I'm going to create this model to mimic the Cochrane result. And because I'm going to be the god of the simulation universe that I'm going to use, I actually know what the truth is. In this particular way, I'm in a privileged position. And I'm going to have a look at the following. I'm going to claim that in terms of time to pain resolution, every patient will have the same proportional benefit. In fact, I'm going to use a simple survival model, a proportional hazards model. And the dichotomy that I will then employ on these continuous data, I'm going to generate some headaches, and they're going to last for a particular amount of time, and then for each headache I'm going to decide whether the headache was treated successfully or not, simply by judging whether pain relief was achieved in 2 hours or not. And I'm going to do this, and we're going to classify patients as responders or non-responders, and we tend to conclude that some don't benefit and some don't, and this is a permanent feature of each patient. So, the numerical recipe works as follows. First of all, generate pain duration for 6,000 headaches. Remember that Cochrane as a whole studied 6,000 patients. I'm going to use the same number, quite a large number, 6,000. And I'm going to use this using an exponential distribution with a mean of just under 3 hours, 2.97 hours to be exact. And these, in fact, will be the placebo durations. So I'm going to generate 6,000 durations of headache treated with placebo. And the exponential distribution is often used when we imagine that we have bedrock unpredictability as regards the length of something. Given an average, we simply don't know what else will happen. It's sometimes used for the arrival of random events in time. For example, occasionally things that are not buses, because of course buses arrive to a timetable, although as we all know from waiting for buses, you wait for ages for a bus and then one comes with 350 million written on the side. So I shall then take the 6,000 pairs and randomly erase one member of the pair. So I'm going to take for each such duration we multiply by just over 3/4 of an hour. That's the point I forgot. By 3/4, sorry. That's the point I forgot to mention. 0.755 to be exact. And I'm going to create 6,000 durations under paracetamol. So in this particular universe, I can rewind time. I can treat every placebo headache, and then I can rewind time, and I have declared, because I'm the god of this universe, that the paracetamol headache will be exactly 3/4 the length of the corresponding placebo headache. Or not exactly, 0.755 the length of the placebo headache. That's what I'm going to do. But then I'm going to say, well, actually, although I know what happened, the humans down there can't know, because they can't rewind time. So I'm going to allow them to see one of the two values. They can either see the placebo value, or they can see the paracetamol value. I'm going to erase one of the pair, and I'm going to erase this randomly. And that, of course, is exactly what we would see in a parallel group trial, and that is exactly the sort of trials that were run here that we're talking about. We would see one of the pairs, not both. And I shall then analyze the data. So the exponential distribution with mean 2.970 is chosen so the probability of response in less than 2 hours of 0.49. That's how I chose it. I chose it to give me exactly that value. And you can see here that is the black curve. This is the length of time to get relief from under placebo. Eventually, everybody will get relief as we go out to infinity, thank goodness. Under paracetamol, then in that case, relief is somewhat faster, and using the particular value I chose there, the net result is that when I have a look at 2 hours, 49% of people will have responded under placebo, and when I have a look under paracetamol, then 59% will have responded. But just to remind you that the original simulation that I used is a counterfactual one. I have in fact got two particular values. So here I've got a few patients that I've generated the results for. And what I've done is I've plotted the paracetamol value against the placebo value. And each of these blue circles here represents a point for a pair of headaches. But remember, in practice, I can't see both members of the pair. I can only see one member of the pair. But if I could, that is what I would see. This particular line is the line of exact equality. This is where the response will be exactly the same under paracetamol and placebo. But here simply is the case that for any particular length of headache you would have under placebo, you would have just about 3/4 the same duration under paracetamol. So on that particular scale, the effect is the same for every single headache. The only thing that varies is how long the headache would have been anyway. So, if I divide now my particular region up into these particular spaces, this is what I will see. Here, there is a region I've now enlarged, I've enlarged the particular space, if you like. Here we have a region in which paracetamol would be the only thing that responded, apparently using the arbitrary definition. Why? Well, that's because we would actually have a value in the paracetamol dimension, which is less than 2 hours, but we've gone beyond the 2 hours in the placebo dimension. Here, in this part of the plot, then in that case, neither responded. Neither responded because of the arbitrary dichotomy that we've used. It actually is the case that for this particular individual here, The difference in time of duration of the headache was a lot less under paracetamol than under placebo, but this particular individual will be labelled as having responded on neither. Were we able to see that individual on both occasions? Here we have an area in which placebo only responds, and because of the particular way I've arranged the simulation, there are no such cases. There's no such case where in actual fact a headache would have shown a response under placebo, but not under paracetamol. And this is the area in which both would respond. This is another way of having the same data. These are those actual durations. Here they are here. And these are the actual durations under paracetamol. And for this particular small sample, then these are the values that I got. I got these 4 individual headaches where I was in the positive region for paracetamol, but I was not in the positive region for placebo. So first of all, to point out that dichotomania is an obsessive-compulsive disorder, which, in my opinion, many physicians seem to suffer from. Statisticians, of course, suffer from the opposite disease, which is continuitis, which is basically they like to think of continuous distributions behind anything that there is. So give them a binary outcome and immediately think, oh, let's have a logistic curve somehow generating this or whatever. But we lose information through such dichotomies, and we tend to believe our own nonsense labels. The labels here are response and non-response, and we then delude ourselves that nature also believes our nonsense. And the next stop then is personalised medicine. So what we actually tend to believe is that somehow this stupid, arbitrary label that we have given, response, non-response, carries with it some causal meaning. It doesn't. It has no implication of causality with it directly. It's simply an arbitrary way of deciding what is good and bad in headaches, and that is very dangerous. And I sometimes say that the whole personalised medicine business has got to be such a big bandwagon because of something which is rather similar, but maybe it's happened with statisticians with normal distribution. I now work in Luxembourg, by the way. I'm originally from Switzerland. I was always used to apologising for the fact that I came from a small country, but now that I've discovered Luxembourg, I isn't quite so bad about it. But a famous mathematician from Luxembourg, Lippmann, is responsible for Poincaré's statement. He's often quoted as being by Poincaré, but actually it was Lippmann who said it to Poincaré. He said everybody believes in the normal distribution because the theoreticians imagine that the empirical people have proved it's empirically true, observable, and the empirical people assume that theoreticians have proved it's an inevitable fact. And this is the problem with personalised medicine, in my opinion. The bench scientists assume we know that there is variation in response in clinical trials, and the clinical trials suppose that clinical trialists suppose that all that wonderful bench scientist medicine proves it must be inevitable. How far? So far, we've only gone halfway in my simulation recipe. I've simulated a placebo headache and a corresponding paracetamol headache, but I can't treat the same headache twice. One of the two is counterfactual, so I now need to get rid of one member of each factual-counterfactual pair, and this is the sort of thing. Here I have, on the left-hand side, pain duration, and I have a counterfactual experiment. I've got a placebo value and an active value, and for each particular patient, I've got these values, and you'll see that the active value of paracetamol is always to the left of the placebo value. In fact, it's always 3/4 of the placebo value. But what I now need to do is I'm going to randomize, and by randomizing, I arbitrarily remove one of the members of the pair. And so now what I see is I see a complete mixture of response according to whether it's paracetamol, according to whether it's placebo, and if I'm not very, very careful, I shall then come to the completely false conclusion that this diagram shows that paracetamol did not benefit everybody. I get from here, where I can clearly see it benefited everybody, to here, where I can no longer see. And if you did analysis of variance in my generation and Mike's generation, I see that Mike's in the audience, same generation. If you did it at university, initially you did one-way analysis of variance, and then you did a randomized block, which was two-way, and then what you got repeated measures within blocks, and all of a sudden, miraculously, you got an interaction that was identifiable. You were then taught the lesson, no replication, no interaction. And this is the same thing on the log scale. If I put it on the log scale, then of course the difference is constant, and these are the differences on the pain duration on the log scale of time. And this is now the simulation. So people don't tend to believe mathematics until it's simulated. Simulation is somehow much more convincing than mathematical demonstration. So all I did was I took my recipe, I actually simulated it, and sure enough I saw exactly the same two curves that I predicted. And so now with these particular values I can actually produce completely and absolutely the results seen in the Cochrane meta-analysis, although I know, because I was in charge here, that every single patient had a benefit being given paracetamol. And just to show that that's the case, here are the results. There they are. Of course, I haven't told you how many simulations I went through until I got the ones that I wanted. Right. So to sum up, the results reported are perfectly consistent with paracetamol having the same effect on every single headache. This does not have to be the case. But we don't know that it's not the case. That's the point. I've produced a simple story, the simplest story possible, that would actually produce exactly the results seen in the Cochrane review. And the combination of dichotomies and responder analysis is basically the work of the devil. It has incredible potential to mislead. And researchers are assuming that because some patients responded in terms of an arbitrary dichotomy, there is scope for personalised medicine. And that does not necessarily follow. So here we have a previous Prime Minister of the UK speaking. This agreement will see the UK lead the world in genetic research within years. I'm determined to do all I can to support the health and scientific sector to unlock the power of DNA, turning an important scientific breakthrough into something that will help deliver better tests, better drugs, and above all, better cares for patients. My emphasis, this was from August 2014. So here we have a paper, again in significance, so edited by wise and wonderful and knowable statisticians, including me, from 10 years ago now. New drugs that are effective and safe for all become harder and harder to find. Individuals react differently to different medications. So there we are. Must be true. It's in print in a statistics journal. How they know it's true, I don't know, but it's true. Chris Hartman points to a future where drugs will be better targeted. With the help of statisticians, we will have our own designer drugs, no longer off the shelf, but tailored exactly to suit our own individual genome. Well, I've got news. No, not with the effect of statisticians, because basically we are miserable bastards. Excuse my French. My motto is the following. My starting gambit with anybody who comes to see me, just remember, whatever you believe in, I don't. Just convince me. And I don't believe this. Technical lead for high-dimensional data and discovery medicine. Okay, so maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Maybe it's right, maybe I'm wrong. What I'm saying is that the data don't support it, in my opinion, because we don't have the data. Here's Sir Richard Sykes. We're going back further in time now. So that was 10 years ago. Now we're going nearly 20 years ago. And now we have Sir Richard Sykes, who was, I think at the time, he was the Chief Executive Officer of Placebo Wellcome, and maybe even at the same time, or shortly to be, the rector of Imperial, and he says individuals who respond favorably to the drug based on their genome, etc., will be targeted and will get smaller, more effective clinical trials, and so on and so forth. Well, have clinical trials got smaller? No, they've not got smaller. Have they got cheaper? No, they've got much more expensive. Why have they got much more expensive? Because now what you'll find is an enormous amount of genetic material is being collected on clinical trials in general. So far, 20 years down the line, I maintain, no, we haven't got a more efficient drug development process. What we actually got is we've got a less efficient drug development process. Here we have the FDA paving the way for personalised medicine, October 2013. So the FDA is seriously, they believe in it, and they're people that are supposed to be cynical, more cynical than statisticians. So here we have a particular report from the FDA, and here we have some evidence as to what's gone wrong. Note, by the way, that migraine is one of the things that they target, so I'd be very interested to know how they know that that's the percentage of people that respond in migraine. Very interested in how they know that. And we have got a number of strange things here. Cancer, 75% response in cancer. That's very strange. What does that mean? What is cancer anyway? I believe, and I'm no expert, I mean, I don't know what cancer is, don't ask me, but I believe, and I've been told, and so it must be true, that if you have testicular cancer, your 5-year survival rate is way up in the high 90s. On the other hand, if you have lung cancer, not nearly so good. But I think we already know that. I'm not quite sure why that, in fact, gives us a role for testicular cancer, but cancer, anyway, is put in this particular way like this. But then we wonder, how on earth did the FDA get this? By the way, I should just say, give the FDA some credit here. What we've got, they got it from this particular paper here, Spear, Heath, Chiozzi and Huff, Trends in Molecular Medicine, but already the alarm bells should be ringing. This is 12 years earlier. 12 years earlier, that's prehistory in pharmacogenetic terms. That's almost as long ago as Sir Richard Sykes' lecture. I mean, that is really, the progress on the bench side since then has been absolutely phenomenal. And yet they're going back to support this. But give them some credit. They've actually ranked things by importance, not alphabetically. Good presentation lecture, that's very good. They concentrated on what remains to be done, very good. They've subtracted the response rates from these are the non-responders here, actually. This is non-response in cancer, sorry. But then they've added some chart junk. They've added some Scottish dancers and some Irish dancers for some particular reason, to give some sort of message. And if they've read the books on presentation, yes, sort by importance, not by alphabetically, but don't add chart junk. But anyway, there we are. So this is where they got it from. So the question then is, they got it from this particular paper, but where did these people get it from? Where did they get the proof that these were the response rates in the various diseases? Well, and they've also got meagre in there. Look, 48, 52, just one subtracting the other two. Well, this is where they got it. They got it from the physician's desk reference. Yes, I kid you not. The people in this paper, which says many interesting things in it, but these particular statistics in the paper was got by some people looking through the physician's desk reference to find out what the percentage of response was in various diseases by a methodology which is not explained and which nobody can repeat. And when the FDA has to prove that there is a scope for personalised medicine, the only thing that they can quote in the report is this, which goes back to that. So that means the whole of the huge enterprise rests on this tiny little piece of nonsense. So the real truth is that these are zombie statistics. They refuse to die. Not only is the FDA's claim not right, it's not even wrong, because it's not even possible to establish what on earth it might mean if it were true. You couldn't find something to prove it was false. And here's a quote for degrees from you: 88.2% of all statistics are made up on the spot. So, the pharmacogenomic revolution is as follows. We're going to have clinical trials with penis signal and non-responders will be eliminated. We're going to have treatment strategies which are theranostic. That's a portmanteau word. Therapeutics plus diagnostics. Personally, I think that's back to front. I think the diagnostics come first. It should be called therapeutics. But that's too late. We've got theranostics now. Markets will have lower volume, but we imagine there'll be a higher price per patient day. Because if that weren't the case, it wouldn't explain why the marketing departments of the pharmaceutical industry are so excited about this wonderful field here. So the implicit assumption is that most variability seen in clinical trials is genetic. Furthermore, it's not obvious revealed in obvious phenotypes. For example, height and forced expiratory volume are very good predictors, are very well predicted. Height is a very good predictor of forced expiratory volume in 1 second. And we also know that height is partly genetically determined. But here's a good tip for you. If you want to know somebody's height, don't ask about their genetic background. Get a ruler. That is really a good way to do it. And this is part of the problem with all the genetic stuff. It faces what I call the phenotypic squeeze. In between the phenotype on one side, for many of these things, and the one-size-fits-all on the other side, which is the simpler thing, it somehow has to squeeze its way in and prove that by looking at the genes that we're going to be able to improve it. So we imagine we've got a small number of genes responsible. I always get nervous at a point. I have a daughter who's a geneticist, and she says, "Daddy, don't talk genetics. Every time you open your mouth, you just prove you know nothing about it." because you can't even pronounce anything properly. So, there we are. So, I don't know, low or no interactive effects, genes acting singly. I always worry about, what is a gene? Is it allele? Probably pronouncing correctly. Or is it locus? Probably pronouncing correctly. But, there's a difference between the two. It's like, whether a treatment is a factor or the levels of a factor. Statisticians are also a bit confusing about this. We're going to be able to do something about it. That might require a high degree of dose flexibility. So it requires that we're geared up to deliver flexible doses in order to be able to do it. In fact, we simply don't know if most variation in clinical trials is due to individual response, let alone genetic variability. So this is a sort of model. I'm not going to get through this, but this is my little model as to how we imagine things go. The things that are in the square boxes are things that you can't actually measure. What we can work with are these things here. These are the things that we can actually see. And we're trying to impute what goes on in this great big system as a whole by intervening at these particular points, or rather at these particular points. So these are the sources of variation in clinical trials, between treatments, between patients, patient by treatment interaction. This is the thing that really is, if it exists, the source of the scope for personalised medicine, and within patient variability, this is the one that everybody forgets. You measure an individual's blood pressure on different occasions, it's not always the same. Even under the same treatment, it's not always the same. And there are various explanations for that. Maybe it is truly varying randomly, your instrument is not perfect, etc., etc. So this particular thing is unfortunately overlooked. And these are the sorts of clinical trials that can identify these. We can identify just the main effective treatment, that's all. Everything else in the parallel group trial, all the random variability that we see, is a function of these three things. B is the fact that patients are different in the first place before we treat them. C is the fact that different patients can react differently to treatment. I'm omitting this as a possibility. I'm just saying we don't know how important it is. And D is the fact that the same patient can, in fact, post different values or measured on different occasions. In a crossover, we can separate out A and B from C plus D. In repeated crossovers or multiple N1 trials, then we can separate A and B and C from D. In the meantime, there's a massive source of unwanted variation in the whole system, and this is doctors. This is something that is overlooked. In fact, you can find variation in practice so large that it cannot be justified by variation in patients. And this is the basic idea behind the way that Intermountain Health, under the leadership of Brent James, who is a physician who studied Deming's quality control principles, is trying to operate the local health service. Because Deming's point was that if a manager does not understand the sources of variation in the system, and this is what we're talking about here, what are the sources of variation that we see? If we don't understand the source of variation in the system, we intervene to deal with them, and we add variability to the system. So, these are the tonsillectomy rates for England by local authority. This is the variation that you get per 100,000, I think. Persons aged under 15, raw estimates of 95% confidence intervals. And you can see a phenomenal variation there. Now, of course, I have danger of being hoisted by my own petard here. These are just observed variation rates, but unfortunately, since what they do is they post confidence intervals, so we've got local estimates of the variability, that means that we can, in fact, apply a mixed model. And when I do that here, you can see that the degree of shrinkage is really rather small. This is the line of equality. There's a little bit less variation between the tonsillectomy rates than you might see just based upon the fact that there are finite numbers and we've got Poisson variation or whatever, but nevertheless there is an enormous difference. And look at the ratio of the maximum to the minimum, it's 4.7. And I put it to you that it's extremely, extremely unlikely that this variation can be explained by differences in need. And so what we can say is the following. Either some doctors are whipping out tonsils not nearly often enough, or some of them are whipping them out too often. And I can tell you what my suspicion is regarding this particular thing. But that is a real source of variation in the system. It might be worth our spending some pounds to deal with. And this is Brent James's advice to doctors. Guys, it's more important that you do it the same way than what you think is the right way. That's because at Intermountain Health they have decided to try and establish on the basis of the evidence base what would be a good policy. And the way in which they work is that they actually tell doctors they're free to do what they want, but if they ever deviate from the agreed policy, they must write down why, and the cases will be reviewed quarterly. And what they find in time is that everybody converges to a common approach, and that this actually reduces the unwanted variability in the system. So far from wanting personalised medicine, what would really be a good idea would be good average medicine would be a contribution to individual health. So, just to bring that point home to you, my daughter and I, the daughter's a geneticist, we both suffer from hay fever, and she showed me the medicine that she was taking for hay fever, and I was interested in the instructions in it. And so, this is what it says here. It's important to know how much your child weighs to make sure you give them the correct amount of medicine. As a guide, a child of 9 years of age will weigh about 30 kilograms. So, this is the advice. Do not give to children who weigh less than 30 kilograms. Do not give to children who weigh under 2 years. This is rather strange already, but that's the particular advice we've got. And then it says how much to take. Adults and children of 12 years and over, 1 tablet once a day. Right. Now comes the personalisation bit. Children of 2 to 11 years who weigh more than 30 kilograms, 1 tablet once a day. Children of 2 to 11 years who weigh less than 30 kilograms, do not give this medicine. That is the reality of what happens out there, and any pharmacokineticist can tell you that we could have been personalising medicine if we wanted to, based on the phenotype for the past 40 years, and we've chosen not to do it, with a few exceptions, one of which is warfarin, for example. And that would be by taking blood samples. But if you say to any marketing man, oh, we're going to take some blood samples, you cannot sell a drug in which needles are involved if an oral form would do. That's just impossible. You can't sell it. That's what they'll tell you. You could do it by using bathroom scales. For example, that would also make a contribution. Not really good because it doesn't predict clearance and all this sort of stuff like that. But it's a start. It tells you something about volume of distribution, etc. Something has some predictive value for concentration of blood. But that's also too complicated. However, I do say that there is one point where one has to be careful of. If we use bathroom scales to personalise doses, most patients would get a better dose. Some of them would get a catastrophic dose, as I know from having taught medical students. So advice, here's the advice. Don't let the label responder infect your brain. If you are forced to use the word responder every time you see it, say, by an arbitrary dichotomy. So that you force yourself to remember it's not causal. Just because somebody labels something response doesn't make it causal. A responder is not a patient who is caused to get better by the drug. Subsequence is not consequence. To establish who really responds and who does not, you need to work very hard. And here's a saying from John Moffat for you, however, the supply of truth always greatly exceeds its demand. But in conclusion, the motto of this great university is, I won't attempt the Latin pronunciation, to discover the causes of things. Dichotomies, responder analysis, and numbers needed to treat do not help in this task. They make it more difficult. They should be abandoned.
Stephen, thank you for an exhilarating lecture with passion and a great deal of truth, which I hope has chimed with many thoughts that many of you have. You certainly should have had them, it's absolutely tour de force. I'd love to talk about all sorts of things there, but I think that everything you've said has got the ring of truth to it, and I'm really grateful for such a fantastic lecture. Can we just thank Stephen again,